waiting for warmth. Two puppies lay side by side, wrapped in duct tape that tightly constricted their small bodies. They couldn't move, couldn't break free. Their tiny paws were nearly dead from the cold, and their curled bodies were clenched in fear and pain. The concrete floor of the warehouse was cold and hard, and each breath reverberated throughout their entire bodies. Darkness enveloped their tiny hearts, and their only comfort was being close to each other. But hope for salvation was slim. Here, in this forgotten corner of the world, no one could hear their silence. Misfortune. The puppies remembered the day when they were still with their mother, alive and full of energy. But something had changed. They were taken away. The pain of losing what was dearest to them was unbearable. In the warehouse where they ended up, everything appeared empty and lifeless. Consumed by cold and terror, the puppies couldn't understand why they were here, why they had been so cruelly abandoned. But they could no longer scream. The duct tape that bound them stripped them of their strength, and pain had become familiar. They simply waited for something to change. Time and fear. Many hours had passed, maybe even days. Who could count? The puppies still lay, unable to move. The cold pierced them to the core, and the duct tape squeezed their bodies, preventing them from breathing freely. They desperately tried to free themselves, but their strength had been drained. Shadows floated in their minds, and their only wish was for this nightmare to finally end. Every rustle in the empty room made them flinch in fear. But no one came. The stranger. Darkness descended upon the warehouse, swallowing everything around it. The puppies, wrapped in duct tape, had long stopped trying to free themselves. They lay motionless, their tiny bodies gripped by frost, and their breathing struggled against the pain. Time had lost all meaning to them. It seemed to freeze in this merciless place. The stars outside could have been bright, but here, on the concrete, it was only empty and cold. Suddenly, just when it seemed the night would swallow everything, footsteps were heard. There were two, quick and steady. Despite their exhaustion and near lack of strength, the puppies lifted their heads. Every sound mattered. Every rustle was a hope for salvation. But this time, the footsteps were different. They didn't sound threatening. On the contrary, they were filled with determination, as though the person knew they needed to be here. And then, a figure appeared in the doorway of the warehouse. The light from the lantern he held in his hands painted everything around them a golden hue, causing the puppies to blink, their eyes briefly sparkling. He was tall, with dark hair, dressed in an old leather coat, and his expression immediately conveyed not surprise, but bitterness and regret. He saw them, two tiny puppies, nearly motionless, surrounded by duct tape and dirt. "Damn," he whispered, barely holding back his emotions. "What have they done to you?" The puppies couldn't respond. They didn't know what words were. Only their small bodies could tell him everything he needed to know, that they had been abandoned, forgotten, left in this cold world. He cautiously approached them, knelt down, and extended his hand to remove the duct tape from one of the puppies. But his movements were slow, so as not to frighten them any further. The puppies felt the warmth of his hands and trembled softly. They didn't understand that he wasn't a threat to them, but their instincts told them this person wasn't going to hurt them. This was the first warmth they had felt in a long time. The man carefully began to unwind the duct tape, gently freeing their little paws from the harsh adhesive strips that wrapped around their bodies. You will be alive," he whispered, looking at the puppy he had already freed, before moving to the second one. "This will end. I promise." The duct tape that had bound their movements was now removed, but pain and weakness still clung to the tiny creatures. They lay there as if unable to believe that all of this was ending. The man lifted them into his arms, one by one, cradling them in his warm palms. They trembled from the cold and exhaustion, but this was a new reality. For the first time in a long while, the puppies felt someone caring for them. They felt themselves being carried into a new, much warmer and safer world. He headed towards the exit, and though the puppies were too weak to fully comprehend what was happening, they sensed how the darkness gradually began to disappear. The man held them tightly, not letting them fall, and before stepping out of the warehouse, he looked at them again, not breaking his gaze. "Everything will be fine," he said softly, but with certainty. "I won't leave you. Rescue." The man, holding the puppies in his arms, hurried toward his old Jeep parked by the warehouse door. The night was cold, and the air cut through to the bone. But he didn't think about the frost. He only thought of the two small creatures in his hands who could barely move due to exhaustion and fear. He gently placed them on the front seat, covered them with his cloak, and quickly started the car. Along the way, he couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened to them if he hadn't come. They would probably have remained in this cold world, abandoned and forgotten. His heart tightened at the thought, and he tried to focus on what mattered. These puppies needed him, and he had to help them survive. The engine roared, and soon they drove out of the foggy city toward the veterinary clinic, several miles away from the abandoned warehouse. The puppies were so weak they could barely hold on, but the man kept watching them, and it gave him strength. He knew their lives were in his hands, and if he didn't help them, their chances of survival were close to zero. Within minutes, they arrived at the clinic. The man was about to get out of the car when he felt one of the puppies stir. It was the first sign of life, a weak one, but still clear. The puppy opened its eyes, meeting the man's gaze, and weakly kissed his fingers, as if trying to thank him for saving it. "You're alive," the man said, surprised, looking at the puppy. "It will be okay, little one. You're going to survive." He carefully took the puppy out of the car and ran toward the clinic, holding it like the most precious thing he had. The clinic doors opened, and the staff was already waiting for him. "Hurry! These puppies are in critical condition," he shouted to the vet, who quickly approached. The vet nodded, examining the puppies with care, quickly assessing each one's condition. Based on his recommendations, the puppies were immediately attended to. One was in the worst condition. Its paws were injured, and its breathing was weak and erratic. The other puppy was slightly stronger, but its body was exhausted, and its internal organs were on the verge of failure due to starvation and stress. The veterinarian immediately began administering necessary medications and setting up IVs, closely monitoring the puppy's vital signs. The man sat nearby, not taking his eyes off them, his heart beating faster with each passing moment. He felt relief filling his soul. The puppies were now in the hands of professionals, and they finally had a real chance at survival. "We'll do everything we can," the vet said, checking their pulses. "But they're very weak. It will take time." The man nodded quietly and sat in the chair beside them. All he could do now was wait. He watched as the vet continued working, unfazed, while his thoughts raced. Who could do this to such defenseless creatures? How did they end up here, in such a terrible condition? But there was no time for questions. He had to focus on saving their lives. Time passed slowly, and the man sat in silence, listening to the puppies' breathing and the sounds of medical equipment beeping and clicking, trying to keep them alive. He felt exhaustion creeping in, but he knew that he didn't need to worry anymore. He was there, and everything would be okay. A few hours later, when the vet returned to check on them again, he said, "It was a tough moment, but it looks like they're pulling through. Both puppies are stable. We'll need to keep them under observation for a few days, but for now, they're out of danger." The man exhaled in relief. He felt the tension that had gripped him for hours slowly melting away. He was ready to watch over the puppies to the end, ready to stay with them until they fully recovered. "Thank you," he said to the vet, his voice full of sincere gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The vet smiled, shaking his head. "We all do our part. But you're the one who gave them a chance at life." The man nodded, looking at the puppies, who were now peacefully sleeping in their cages with IVs. A sense of calm filled his soul, something that couldn't be replaced by anything else. He knew he had saved them, and now their lives were once again in his hands. Recovery. Days passed, and the puppies slowly but steadily began to recover. Their condition, which had initially been critical, improved with each passing day, thanks to the care and constant observation of the vets. The man, whom the puppies had already begun to see as their protector, visited the clinic every morning and evening to spend time with them. His presence had become a source of not just warmth, but also confidence that they were no longer alone. The puppies, who had once been bound by harsh duct tape, now relished the feeling of freedom. When they first arrived at the clinic, they could barely stand on their little paws. But now, after several days of treatment, they were beginning to take their first tentative steps. Their tiny bodies, though still weak, were recovering. Irina, the vet monitoring their progress, made more optimistic forecasts with each day. "They're responding to treatment quite quickly," she told the man as he sat by the cage. "I think both of them can recover fast if this continues." The man watched the puppies carefully, each of them joyfully running around the small room, exploring its corners. Leia, the puppy with white spots on her chest, was a bit more cautious but still tried to play with the small toys they had given her to stimulate her. Ben, the other puppy, was more energetic, his eyes sparkling with determination as he ran around the room, delighting in every new chance to move. Every morning, the man brought new toys, pieces of fabric, and little toy balls. He carefully observed how the puppies engaged with the world around them, how they gained strength day by day. He knew that time was all they needed. Time to recover, time to learn, time to build a bond with him. He had become something of a figure they looked to for protection and care. He began to feel that they could once again become part of his life. With each passing day, their behavior became more confident. Leia learned to bring back toys, and Ben, despite his playful nature, understood that at the end of each play session, food and a cozy corner to sleep awaited him. The vet also carried out special procedures to help their bodies fight off infections and strengthen their immune systems. With each day, they're becoming more independent, Irina said when the man came for another checkup. "We can start giving them more time for walks around the clinic's grounds. That will help them adjust faster to new life conditions." The man was incredibly pleased. The puppies, who once lay motionless in pain, now ran joyfully around the clinic yard, their little tails wagging happily. He could see how they were enjoying their freedom, how they felt safe and loved. "We did it," he said to himself as he sat by the cage, watching them play. "They're alive again. They have a chance." Day by day, the puppies grew more confident, and their physical recovery was nearing its completion. But for the man, their savior, the most important thing was that they were starting to trust him. Leia would come to him, lie next to him, and rest her head on his lap. Ben, with his bright personality, would hop around, nibbling at his hands with little, affectionate bites and nudging him with his nose. Their bond was growing, and this was the foundation of their new life. And one morning, when the sun was just beginning to rise, the man came to the clinic, thinking about how soon the puppies would be ready for the next stage of their lives. They looked strong and healthy, but that wasn't everything. They still needed love and a home, a family where they could be happy and safe. The man stood, watching Leia and Ben play together, and felt his heart fill with happiness. The puppies had survived. They had endured incredible suffering and pain, but now they had a chance at a life full of love and happiness. And he knew he wouldn't let them go. That was his promise. A new home. Several more weeks passed since the puppies started recovering. Leia and Ben, despite their painful memories, became more confident and playful. Their behavior, which had been cautious and reserved at first, was now filled with energy and joy. Every morning, they greeted him at the door with joyful barks and wagging tails that seemed to wag so hard that they could fly off. The man could no longer imagine his life without these little creatures who had brought so much light and happiness into his home. He often thought about what would happen to them when they were fully recovered. The vet had said that they were now physically ready for a new life. But what would come next? Where would they live? With whom? And how long would they still need his protection? One morning, after Leia and Ben finished their morning games, the man decided to take an important step. He knew the puppies needed to find their own home, their own family. He couldn't keep them all. He had to make this decision so they could grow in a full environment that would be best for them. The man looked at pictures on his phone as he searched for new owners for the puppies. He contacted potential candidates, spoke with them, checked their homes, and made sure they were ready to accept the puppies. He wanted to ensure they would be in the right hands. Finally, he found a couple who were ready to take Ben. They were a young family with a small house in the suburbs, a yard, and dog toys that they had already prepared. The man, feeling anxious, went there with Ben. He knew it was the right decision, but his heart ached at the thought that the puppy he had saved would now live with someone else. When they arrived at the new home, Ben, though still a bit cautious, immediately felt that this place was safe. A boy who met them at the door happily picked him up and began gently petting him. Ben was slightly nervous, but with every moment, his fear lessened, and like any puppy, he started to feel that this would be a good place. Standing on the threshold of the new home, the man felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had done everything he could to ensure that Ben would be in good hands. But still, the parting was painful. He knelt down before the puppy and quietly said, "You'll be okay, little one. You deserve happiness." Ben looked at him with his wise eyes, as though understanding that this was goodbye. The puppy quietly kissed his hand, and the man could no longer hold back his tears. The man left, but his heart felt heavy. He understood that the puppy was starting a new life, and that was important, but the goodbye was still hard. Everything he had experienced with Ben, all the moments of care and rescue, would stay with him forever. When the man returned to the clinic with Leia, the vet approached him and quietly said, "You've done everything you could. Now they'll be happy. You saved them, and they will never forget your care." The man nodded, standing in the corridor and watching Leia, who had now become more confident, running around him, barking and happily wagging her tail. He knew that soon she would find her family too. But right now, at this moment, he needed to be with her, so she could also experience everything he had with Ben. After all, he had saved her too. The man decided that Leia would stay with him for a while longer. He knew she felt safe, and he also felt that as long as she was with him, she was safe. But one day, a few weeks later, when Leia had become even healthier and more playful, he received another call. It was a family ready to welcome her into their home, a home with a large garden and loving children. The man met with them, and just like with Ben, he felt that he was doing the right thing. With a heavy but determined heart, the man said goodbye to Leia too. She was his friend, his little saved miracle, but he knew her place was with another family, one that would give her all their love and care. The goodbye was just as difficult. Leia couldn't help but feel the pain of the moment, but like Ben, she knew that happiness awaited her. And despite the tears in the man's eyes, he was sure that for the puppies, their future was just beginning. Now, they would be happy. When he left, leaving Leia at her new home, he felt his heart swell with pride. He had not only saved them, he had given them a chance at life. And that chance had become a reality, a new path. Saying goodbye to Leia was just as painful as saying goodbye to Ben, but the man knew it was the only right step for the puppies. He had given them life, a chance to survive, recover, and find their new families. Now, they were happy, and that brought him relief, though his heart still ached for them. That night, after returning home, the man sat in the silence of his apartment. It was empty. He couldn't shake the feeling that the house was no longer full. Though he knew he had done everything to help the puppies find their families, he missed their presence. This was the first night he had stayed alone, and the emptiness in the house was palpable. He turned off the lights and lay in the dark, remembering every moment he had spent with Leia and Ben. From the very first day he found them in the abandoned warehouse, to their slow recovery, to the moments when they began to trust him, and the final moments when he said goodbye to each of them. These moments had been parts of his life, parts of his heart, and now they were leaving, no matter how painful it was. But the man knew he had made the right decision. The puppies were now in the hands of those who could give them the love and care they deserved. He couldn't keep them in his life forever, but he was happy that he could be a part of their journey. A few days later, still processing his emotions and the emptiness, he received a new call. It was Irina, the vet who had watched over the puppies throughout their rehabilitation. She was happy to hear his voice and told him that both puppies were doing well. Ben had already settled into his new home and was living an active life, and Leia was getting along perfectly with the children of her new family, who adored her. Irina assured him that both puppies were healthy and their destinies had turned out well. "You can't imagine how happy I am to see them happy," she said, and her voice carried sincere gratitude. The man smiled, though it was a smile tinged with sadness. "I'm glad they're happy, and thank you for your work. Without you, none of this would have been possible. You've done more for them than you can imagine," Irina replied. "You became their savior, and now they're living proof that the world isn't so bad." After talking to her, the man felt a lightness return to his heart. He knew he had done everything to ensure that the puppies could live happily. He realized their journey had ended, but his own journey continued. A new day brought with it new opportunities. The man understood that although his life had changed, it had not ended. He decided that now he would focus on himself, develop his life, and find his place in the world. But he also knew he would always remember the puppies he saved, those who made his life more meaningful. He got up from the couch, went out onto the balcony, and looked at the city slowly waking up. He felt a surge of inspiration. He was ready to start a new chapter of his life. A few weeks later, after finding his new balance, the man became a volunteer at an animal shelter. He continued helping save animals, caring for those who ended up in situations like Leia and Ben's. He dedicated himself to helping those who couldn't protect themselves every day. This was a new stage in his life, and he knew this was exactly what he needed. Saving and loving animals became his new goals. But he never forgot the puppies who would forever remain in his heart. Leia and Ben, despite the separation, had become a part of his story. And though their paths had diverged, the man knew he had made the world a little bit better for these two little creatures. It was his gift and his purpose. Time passed, and the man continued his work. His life was filled with meaning, and he felt that everything that had happened was part of his journey. He was grateful for every moment he spent with Leia and Ben, for the chance he had given them, and for the love they had given him in return. And even though the puppies were far away, the man felt that their story would stay with him forever. There was a place for them in his soul, and that place was filled with light.